Hey guys, welcome to another US history lecture. Last time we went over the 70s and before we went over the 60s, and we have been going in order ever since World War II, but we have pretty much reached the end of a curriculum by, finishing off with Vietnam last week. So we are actually going to go all the way back in time to the beginning of US history. And the reason why I started on the 1900s at the beginning of our journey through all this is because I didn't know for sure how long I'd be making these videos. So I wanted to start from the 1900s so that we get some of the more interesting stuff like World War I, World War II, and Cold War, Vietnam, all that. But since I have decided to continue making videos, we do now have time to go all the way back to the 1700s. So anyway, let's start off with how the US started off with colonization. So, for starters, why did all of these European nations even want to explore into the New World? Well, there were a couple of reasons. The European countries did demand for more and cheaper products, so finding this new world that would have all of these new resources would be very beneficial to the people that find it. And there was also a race for searching for new routes to the east. And so at this time, it was pretty much common knowledge that the world was a globe and not flat, meaning that if one were to travel to the western direction, then eventually they will come to the east. And that was kind of what they were doing. The Europeans tried to find trade routes to India by traveling around the world rather than going across Europe. Then we have the three G's, which are gold, glory, and gospel. Otherwise, you might see it as gold, glory, and God. And that the three were the motivations that these European nations had for coming to the New World. Gold meaning they wanted more money. Glory meaning they wanted to be the ones to own these new lands and be the owners of new territories. And God, meaning that they wanted to be the ones to convert the natives into their religion of choice. So, what were the effects of exploration? Well, we had the slave trade that stemmed due to exploration because they wanted more workers to work the sugar plantations that were found in the West Indies. One of the biggest effects of exploration was the spread of disease, and a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, it really outlines how deadly the germs really were. When we talk about the Native American population dying as a result of the Europeans, most people would assume that the natives died due to military powers from the Europeans, but in fact, most of them, almost all of them, died due to the disease and not really the actions of the people themselves. There were also conflicting claims between land for many Europeans because it was really difficult at the time to see to draw territory lines and to see, who owns which territories. And to kind of fix that, there was the papal line of demarcation that was created in 1493 by Pope Alexander VI, which divided the New World between Spain and Portugal, and also the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, which gave most of the New World in the Americas except Brazil to Spain. So with this picture here, you can see the divisions of the land, and if you could see my cursor here, everything west of this Treaty of Tordesillas line would belong to Spain, and everything to the east of that would belong to Portugal. And as you can see, it really does look like Spain got the better deal because, Spain has all of this and Portugal, only has this. And that is true, but the reason why it was divided like this is because the Europeans back then didn't realize how big of a territory there would be here. So, they more assumed that the line would be kind of like here where my cursor is. But obviously that is not the case, and Spain definitely got a better deal. And that also explains why, if you guys didn't know, the entire country or continent of South America, they speak Spanish, all these Latin American countries. However, Brazil is the only country in South America that speaks Portugal, and that is the case because of the way the Treaty of Tordesillas line divided the two areas of land and the ownerships that followed. Then we have something called the Columbian Exchange, which is an exchange of all kinds of animals, plants, culture, and diseases, and also ideas between the Eastern and Western hemispheres, and that created a effect of cultural diffusion that changes the two worlds forever. And here you can see a diagram of all the stuff that was traded, so from the North America to Europe, and then into Africa, back to the Americas. And you can see this kind of cycle of goods, and obviously here, disease is definitely one of the goods that does travel to North America. So when it comes to Spanish building an empire, or Spain building an empire, we have something first called the encomienda system. And this encomienda system is pretty much a system of slavery, and what pretty much happened is the European governments would give the colonists land, and the colonists, what they'd have to do is try to, get the natives to work for them, and at the same time try to Christianize them as well. And we have something called a black legend, which is a concept that the conquerors merely tortured and killed the Indians, and pretty much were just completely posed a negative impact for the Indians, and all they did was steal, kill them with their germs, and left nothing but misery behind. And this is somewhat true in the sense that the Native Americans, a lot of them died, and they definitely got the short end of the stick. But some good things that did happen was that the Europeans were ultimately able to completely change their culture in a better way. They were able to introduce laws, religion, and language into the native societies, and really the Europeans were the ones that laid this foundation of a modern society for these Native Americans. And the Spanish also incorporated indigenous culture with their own, as they did not really shun the natives, and they were the biggest European nation to intermarry with the Native Americans. Out of the big three, at least, the big three nations being Spain, England, and France. France, they did a lot of trading, especially fur trading with the natives, but they did not really do intermarrying as much, at least not as much as Spain did. The English, however, they were pretty much completely isolated, did not intermarry at all with the natives. So let's talk about England. We have the Spanish Armada, which is defeated by England, and therefore England emerges as a naval power. And I mean, even till today, and all of 20th century and 19th century U.S. history, the British were always the one to have this imposing navy, and it really starts here when they were able to defeat the Spanish Armada. It also brings a Protestant nation to the forefront. On the other hand, Spain was Catholic, so England is Protestant and Spain is Catholic. So what are some characteristics of the English Empire? Well, let's talk about the types of colonies. First, we have something called charter colonies, which are trading companies that are made up of stockholders who shared both the profits and the losses of the colonies. An example would be Virginia. So basically, a group of people, they would be the ones to really start colonizing, and it was risky in a sense that if the colony failed, then they would be the ones to pay for all that. But it was also a safety mechanism, because although they would kind of pool in all of their money, in a sense, whatever successes or failures they have, at least they are able to share it among other people. So if the colony were to fail, you wouldn't be the sole responsible person to have to pay up for everything. Then we have proprietorship colonies, which were royal grants of land to royal favorites. So the royal countries itself from Europe, they would be the ones to give grants to colonies. And an example of that would be Maryland and Lord Baltimore, which we will talk about later. And we also have royal colonies, which were pretty much just ruled by the crown of England. And an example of that would be Georgia. So let's start talking about some of the colonies, some of the famous ones at least. We have Chesapeake Bay, which was made up of Virginia and Maryland. You can see right here is where the Chesapeake Bay would be, right between Maryland and Virginia. And in the Chesapeake Bay, much of the labor at first were done by indentured servants, but something does happen later on, which I probably talk about in a later video, and it's called Bacon's Rebellion, and it's pretty much just to sum it up quickly, a rebellion led by indentured servants because they thought they were being treated poorly, and ever since that, America turned to slavery instead of indentured servants for sources of labor. We have a man named John Rolfe from Jamestown, and he's the one who pretty much saves this dying colony by introducing tobacco. And the first form of self-government is created through the representative self-government, the House of Burgesses, in 1619. And we also have a Native American tribe called the Powhatan Confederacy, and they were a neighboring Native American tribe that fell victim to the 3 Ds, which would be disease, disorganization, and disposability. Disease, obviously, the germs that the Europeans brought, the Native Americans were not used to them and had not developed immunities to them, which is why they fell victim so easily to disease. Also disorganization, they were just a bunch of scattered tribes, which led to almost no unity, which is what really led to their downfall. And finally, disposability. They were no match for the technologies that the Europeans had, and whenever conflict would arise, the Native Americans would definitely fall. So let's continue talking about Maryland and Virginia. Some key terms. We have Lord Baltimore in Maryland, and this is a proprietorship colony, as we have said. We have some acts of toleration in Maryland, which guarantees religious toleration, but only to Christians and no other race. So this was pretty much targeted for Catholics. It was saying that, Catholics had religious tolerance here, and again, did not affect any other religion, including the Jews. And we had indentured servitude, which they are workers who work for a period of around 5 or 7 years in exchange for someone else paying for their passage to America. Now let's talk about Georgia, which is known as the buffer colony. And Georgia was the last of the original 13 colonies, which were formed in 1733. And it originally acted as a buffer between the South Carolina, which were ruled by aristocrats, and the Spanish Florida and French Louisiana. And it also served as a penal colony for debtors. But let me kind of try to explain how Georgia was a buffer colony. So as you can see, here's South Carolina, here's Florida, and right here would be Louisiana. And if you wanted to get from South Carolina to Florida, or South Carolina to Louisiana, or vice versa, they would have to pass through Georgia, which makes Georgia this buffer colony. And then we had this very famous man named James Oglethorpe, who became the leading statesman in Georgia, and he did repel many Spanish attacks. And later in 1750, Georgia becomes very wealthy by adopting the plantation system, which they model after South Carolina. Now let's talk about the Protestantism and the formation of Puritanism. So now we're kind of taking this back all the way to the 1500s and what's going on in Europe right now, or back in that time. And we have Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which divides Christianity. And we also have a man named John Calvin, who creates another religion called Calvinism, and his supporters were known as Calvinists, and they believed in predestination and that God already decided who would be damned to hell and who would be saved in their afterlives as soon as they're born. So whatever actions that they do in their lifetimes, that would not affect their destination. And we have a group called the Puritans, which I'm sure you guys have heard of. And the Puritans were a branch of Calvinists, so they also believed in predestination. They believed that there was nothing you could do in your lifetime to change where you go in your afterlife. The difference between the Puritans is that they wanted to purify the English, which is also called the Anglican Church, of all Catholic rituals. And it's important to know that the Puritans did not want to separate themselves from the Anglican Church, but only wanted to purify them, to make them pure again. And they believed that only visible saints should be admitted to church membership, so it was a very exclusive kind of church membership. Then we have the Separatists, and these were the extreme Puritans, and these are the ones that not only wanted to purify the Anglican Church, but they wanted to break away from the Church of England altogether, to completely separate themselves. And they wanted to leave England because they just wanted to separate themselves. And the most common types of separatists are the Pilgrims. So now let's talk about another colony, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the MBC. We have Pilgrim leaders drawing up and signing the Mayflower Compact. And the Mayflower Compact was pretty much just a simple agreement that they were going to form a government, and within this government, the people that are subject to this government will submit to the will of the majority. So a majority rules kind of situation. And this was a promising step towards self-government, and later adult male settlers would assemble in town meetings. Then we have a man named John Winthrop, and he became the colony's first governor. And he has a very famous quote where he said that the purpose of the colony was to be a city upon a hill. And this isn't meant to be taken literally. There's not really a city on a hill, but what it means is that this Massachusetts Bay Colony will be this godly, holy city that everyone will look up to. So that is what he wanted. There he is, John Winthrop, very famous and influential. So the colonists believed that they had an agreement with God to build a holy society that would be a model for humankind. So they wanted everyone to look up on the Massachusetts Bay Colony as this great, holy colony. Then we have the creation of town governments and town hall meetings, and these were not really, well, they were democratic in the sense that people vote and the majority rules, but the people that voted were just the white landowning male church members. So not that much representation. The women aren't getting a vote. Natives are definitely not getting votes. It's just the peasant poor class are not getting votes. It's just the white rich landowning aristocrats. I'll talk about some religious dissenters, and these are some very famous people that we will talk about right now. We have Anne Hutchinson. There's a picture of her right there, and she was known for challenging the authority of the clergy in the Bay Colony, as well as she was also challenging gender roles at the time, which was very, very heavily looked down upon. And she claimed to have this direct contact with God, and like I said, she challenged gender roles in the church. Then we have a man named Roger Williams, who was threatening to Puritan leaders, and this was because he was an extreme separatist, and he advocated for a clean break from the Anglican Church. Again, Puritans wanted to merely purify the Anglican Church and rid them of all Catholic rituals. However, extreme separatists like Roger Williams, he wanted to completely separate from the Church of England. He also challenged the Bay Colony Charter and condemned them for not paying natives for their land. So he had this moral outlook and sympathy for these natives. And he was denied the authority of government to regulate religious behavior, and therefore he was banished to Rhode Island for trying to create this sense of religious tolerance. Okay, so let's talk about some more various colonies. We have Rhode Island, which we just talked about, and Roger Williams, after he was banished there, he would go on to create religious toleration to all. Again, Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. And then we have New Hampshire, and the industries in New Hampshire at this time was focused on fishing and hunting. We have Connecticut, where they had fundamental orders, which was kind of this written constitution that established a democracy. We have Pennsylvania, who was founded by William Penn, who was a Quaker, and he also fought for religious toleration, and he was a pacifist, meaning that he was friendly to Native Americans. He heavily shunned the ideas of attacking them, and he also fought for women's rights, which, like I said before, was very rare in terms of this time period. So religion in colonies, let's kind of break down which colonies promoted the most amount of religious toleration. That would be Rhode Island and Pennsylvania. Rhode Island, led by Roger Williams and also Anne Hutchinson, who supported complete religious toleration, and also Pennsylvania, led by William Penn, and as we just said, he was a Quaker who supported full religious toleration as well. And we also have Maryland, who was semi-tolerant, meaning that they were tolerant to any Christian groups, meaning that Catholicism was perfectly okay in Maryland. However, that kind of religious toleration was not as complete as Rhode Island or Pennsylvania was, because the one in Maryland did not extend out towards other religions such as Judaism. And we have some colonies that did not promote any religious toleration, even less than Maryland, and that would be the Massachusetts Bay, and they felt that toleration should only be extended to Puritans. Now let's talk about the conflicts with Native Americans. Obviously, with the Europeans coming into their lands, conflict is inevitable to arise. First up, we have the Pequot War and King Philip's War. And King Philip, he is a Native American. He is definitely not a European king, and his Native American name is Metacom. And this conflict arises from the fact that both the natives are fighting for their own land. And after King Philip's War, the natives only posed a sporadic threat to New Englanders. And we have something called the New England Confederation, formed in 1643, and this was formed by New England to kind of join the colonies together to defend themselves against the natives and other European colonies such as the Dutch or the French. And this is one of the original examples of colonial unity, and we will definitely see more colonial unity leading up to the days of the Revolutionary War in the end of the 1700s. But we have some more English government philosophy, the Dominion of England, which tried to enforce these navigation laws, meaning that they try to force colonies to be only able to trade with England. However, colonists found that trading with England would be much more expensive than just trading amongst themselves or with other colonies. So colonists got around these navigation laws by smuggling, which was very big at this time. Then we have something called salutary neglect, where England meaning the mother country, they decide to take a hands-off approach and pretty much tells the colonies that they could do whatever they wanted as long as they were making money. And this does not last too long. It ends in 1763, and that is one of the things that angers the colonists to revolt against England and start a revolution. And anyway, yeah, that's going to be it for today. Definitely, we took kind of a throwback approach by talking about the 1600s today rather than continuing on with the 20th century. But yeah, I will continue to be making videos all the way leading up to the 1900s. So that means we will be covering over the rest of colonization, things like the Civil War. So that will be very fun. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys next week for our next video, where we will be continuing the early days of U.S. history.